All right. At this point here, we're now on the front end. So make sure you open only the app. Now, open your terminal. From our terminal, copy the following. Okay. So right now, we're going to create that on our local directory, this time with Redux TypeScript. Okay. So then press enter. Right? There you go. Now let's test our React by typing npm start. And there you go. At this point here, we're running Redux-Toolkit. By definition, this is intended to be standard way to write Redux logic. It was originally created to help address the common three errors concerned about Redux. So if you recall, back in the earlier days, they they promote this what you call Redux. Now with the upgraded features, this solves the three problems during the earliest day. So the first one they said is the complicated configuration. during Redux store. And the other one, they have a package to get Redux to do anything useful. So that's the second one. While the third one, Redux requires too much boiler template code. So these are the three things that they ensure to overcome using the new Redux toolkit. So that's for the definition. All right. So this point here, let's start cleaning up everything from here. So let's minimize this one. So the only difference is here now is that there's a bunch of folder here, unlike the normal React. So we have the features. Now under the app, we have also the hooks and store. Now features, this is where the operation takes place. Okay. Now for our cleanups, let's delete all of these things. So except this app section. So let's begin clean up the features. So by deleting these counters or counter, okay, so that's the first one. Now let's step over to store. Okay, let's check first. Okay, so I guess nothing here to replace from hooks. Okay, so same goes. Oh, okay. So from here, from store, we can simply remove this one. Okay, we can remove this one and this section here. So for now, let us just leave the reducer. So next, so all from the features is okay. Now let's head over to our app.typescript. And from here, let's delete some section here. So first is this counter. Okay, so let's delete this logo, this counter. Okay, so anything from this section here. Okay, so let's delete that. Okay, so everything's clean now. Also, let's remove also this logo. Now that we managed to clean up everything, let's begin first with the features. So from our features, let's create a new folder. I'm going to name this as movies. Now we have a few files to create within this folder. So the first one, we want to create the action or the actions.typescript. Next, I'm going to create also the reducer.typescript. And then let's create also the selector. Let's create also the services. Okay. So these are the few things that need for this section. And for the last one, let's create a index.typescript. So this will hold all these section within these features. Okay, so that's the role of our index. So first, let's work on the services. Okay, now that we have our services, the first thing we need to do now is to install actions that will serve as a communication between the front end and the back end. So let's clear this up. But first, we need to cancel this one by typing npm install actions. So that's the only command that we need for now. All right. So once done, let's create a utilities for these actions. So let's begin creating a folder within this source folder. And we're going to name this as UT or utils. And then within these utils, let's create a new file. And I'm going to name this as index.typescript. Now, since we're doing a global declaration, so safe to say, using these utilities, we're going to declare actions within this certain section only. To avoid multiple callback, so let's declare a global actions for every operation. So let's start by importing our actions. And then let's export that. Now let's assign that to variable name actions public. And then from here, let's call the actions. Then let's create the base URL. Now for our base URL, let's call the http colon forward slash localhost. Okay, if you recall, we're using port 8000 and the base URL in our backend is slash API. All right. So basically, that's all we need for our utilities. So from here, we're going to use this in our services. So let's work on that. So from here, let's set now to the features and select services. So first, we need to import that actions public. Okay. And then let's create a class. Then we're going to name this as movie service. Alright, so that's our services class. And now let's create first our first request. Now for our first request, let's create a get all with the async. Okay, so from here, let's return that by calling the actions public.get. Now, if you recall, we're using this URL. All right. So that's all we need for our get all. Now this get all will serve as the get all from our backend. So now let's configure this now to our other stuff from here. So let's proceed on the next step. On our next step, I return back our project FullStack. So here I combine back again the API since our next step is to connect from the backend. So just prepare your folder and head back to this section. Next, let's create another function. So select this action TypeScript, this one. Then from here, let's create an export cons, and I'm going to name this as get all movies. Then I'm going to paste this line. Okay, so from here, we're going to import all these requirements from this line here. So first one is the create async func. And we're going to get this from Redux, this one. So Redux Toolkit. Now next, let's also import this root state. Now from the source, let's get that from store. Now to get the store, we need to locate that from our app folder. There you go. Now next, as one of the requirements, we're going to import also this IB. For now, we don't have this one. So let's create the TypeScript for this one. Okay. Now for the requirements for the iMovie is first we need to export the interface. And let's call the iMovies or iMovie. And let's bring down the following by calling the status to string. So that's the first one. Next, let's call also the string for the data. Right? So let's copy this iMovie. And from here, let's import that interface. Right, so that's all we need for our export get all movies. Now for the content. So the things that we're going to add here is first, we need to declare a global prefix by typing cons module prefix. And for our prefix, I'm going to name this as movies. Okay, so let's bring down this one by typing tilde. Then let's call the dollar, this one. And let's call the get all, comma. Now we have some few things from here. So the first one is we need to call the async. Now for the parameters, let's begin with the arguments. I'm going to assign this to any. And then let's assign the tank API. Okay, so that's what we need. Okay, so inside here, let's create a try and catch. For our catch, let's begin by assigning a variable name e. I'm going to assign that to any. Okay, so there are a few things from here. So let's work with try. From here, let's declare a variable name response. Let's bring down the await. And then, okay, so what we need here is the services. Now, head over the root section and let's import the services. Okay, I want to put it on the top. Now for our services, or rather call it like here, movie service. So definitely we're going to get this from our services. Okay, so let's call that. And then let's call our get all. Okay, so that's the first one. So now let's create a variable for data. And then let's call back the response data from response. So from here, let's create a condition where response dot status is equals to 200. So what we're going to do is we're going to return that value and call the temp API, or rather only the data. Okay, so that's what we need. So we're going to return this data value, else. Now if there's an error during the process, let's return this time. Let's call now the temp API and going to return the reject values. Now what are these values? Of course, the data result. Okay, so that's what we need for our try. Now next. So from here, let's copy this one. And also, we're going to return the catch errors. So the data here, let's call the E and the response and the data. That's how we return our data. Okay, so let's check everything. Okay, so that's for that one. Try. Okay. Oh, so we have an error. Okay, so found the error. So we need to include the from, and there you go. So feel free to post this line code. And from here, okay, so since we're on the get all movies first, so the next thing we need to do now is to import this function to our reducer. So let's work on that. From here, let's set over to reducer. And let's set the initial state by typing cons initial state. Okay, so we have few things from here. First, we need to set the movies to object. And then let's set to status message to empty. So the next one is the error message to empty. Then let's assign an is error false. Next, we're going to set the is success equals to false. Then set to is loading. Same. We're going to set to false as well. All right. Now for this one, let's set up let's make an interface for the movie state. Now for the movie state, okay, so that's the name of the interface that we're about to set this one. So head over to your movie or the iMovie. Then from here, let's set the interface for the movie state. I'm typing export interface. iMovie state. And then let's set the movie to any. Okay. So basically, we're going to copy that from the user. So much better to copy this one here so that it would be a little faster. So from our status or the status message, we're going to set that to string. Same goes to error message. Now this one here, since this is a boolean, so let's set up to boolean. Same goes. All right, so that's all we need for the interface. So let's import that by calling import from iMovie. Now with this one, we'll assign this interface to the initial state. Okay. So we have also, okay, so we failed to set the movies. So this is already movie. This is movie. Okay, so it should be movies. All right, so that's all we need for that. Okay, so from here, we're going to use this initial state in our builder, or should I say the reducer. Now, but first, we need to call the export cons, and we're going to assign this reducer to movie reducer. Okay, so we have a few things from here. So first, we need to create the reducer. Okay, so from here, let's bring down the initial state. And then, let's call a variable name builder. Okay, so that's all we need for our movie reducer. Now, there are a few things from here that we're going to start with. So first, let's focus on the get all movies. Now, for this case, we have three things to set. The first one's for pending, fulfilled, rejected. So these are the keys needed for this one. Now to build our reducer, simply bring down the builder. And then let's create an add case. Okay. So what are the things needed for our add case? The first thing is we need to get all movies. Okay, so as you recall, this add movies is taken from the action. So we need to import this get movies. Okay, so that's all we need. So since this is the first function that we created, we should create the case for get movies. Now there are a few things from here that we need to set up. So first, we're going to set for the pending. Then from here, let's set the state. Okay. Now for the pending, let's apply the state that is loading to true. Okay. So you will notice how did I get this state? So all the states was taken from this initial state. So our default values with this one will automatic executed within this builder. Okay, so that's the first one. The next one, I'm going to copy this one. Okay, so the next one is we're going to call the fulfilled. Now, fulfilled stands for the good result. So if there's a no errors, so this will retrieve all the positive result. So there are two things here that we're going to set. So instead, besides state, let's apply also the actions. Okay, so from our actions, okay, so what will it do once it has a no bugs or the fetching successfully retrieved? Now, we're going to initialize the following. So first one is by calling the state, we're going to call the movies. And then let's apply the result by calling this action, the payload, that data. Okay, so that's the first one. Now, for our trigger point, let's assign the state that is loading. Okay. So here, notice only pending, it's still loading. So now, let's close this loading by setting up to false. Okay, next. Let's call the state again. This time, we're going to set also the error. For the error, let's set to false since there's no error. And then let's add one more. This time, if success. Okay. For the success, let's set to true. Right? So that's all we need for our fulfill. Now, what if there's an error along the way? Now, take note the difference. Pending is the waiting process, while fulfilled is the successfully transact or being already processed. Now, what if there's an errors along the way? So let's add that case. So from here, let's call the rejected. Okay, so that's the third case. Now for the setup here, okay, so what are the things needed from here? So once there's an error along the way, the first one is we're going to set the state to display the error by calling the actions that that status. Okay, so that's the first one. Next, let's call the state that is loading, and we're going to set this to false. Okay, next, we're going to set the state is error to true, and then let's also call the state is success equals to false. Now there's a few things here. Notice here there's an error. So it said it's an unknown type. So to fix this one, let's assign this action to any. There you go. So that's all we need for our reducer. So take note, this is only for get all movies. Now, as we move along, we're going to make 3 of these for every process. So, okay, so that's it for the get all movies. Okay, next, let's move to the next step. On our next step, let's work now with selector. Okay, now from our selectors, we're going to import the root state. Okay, so that's from our root state. Next, let's import also the create selector. Okay, so create selector is one of the properties in Redux Toolkit. So from here, let's apply those by typing export cons. So let's set this to select movies state. Okay, so from here, let's forward the result from our movies. Now, what are the things needed here? So the first one is, let's call this state and go to assign this root state, and then let's call upon our state with the result. So let's bring down the movies. Okay, so that's the first one. Okay, next, let's assign a movie selector or a selector by typing export cons and going to name this as movie selector. And then let's bring down the create selector. So what are the contents of this selector? Let's call first the select movie state, and then let's pass that to our state, then to our state. Okay, so this is export. Okay, so that's all we need for our selector. Okay, so let's check everything. Okay, good. So that's all we need for this one. Now, let's consolidate everything from our or these all features here. So let's consolidate that by selecting this index.typescript. So to build it as one, let's call upon the index and compile everything. So by typing export all from, the first one is the actions. Next, let's export also all from reducer. And then the last one is we're going to export all from the selector. Okay, so that's all we need from the index.typescript. So this is a compilation or combined section for all these process. So that's how we set for the index or to call upon one or as one process. Okay, so from here, let's move now to the next step. Before we proceed to the next step, let us discuss about state. Now, as you can see, the current Redux uh, focuses on the state. So you can say that these states are some global variables that will be preserved over time. Now, there's some issues before wherein you rely on a certain state, but as the projects grow bigger, some of these values from the states are not maintainable. So this is where Redux Toolkit are designed this time. So to keep and maintain those data, even though in a large scale project, Redux suggests to install these library packages, and they call these Redux persist. So at this time, for this demo, we're going to use that library packages to maintain our state as we go deeper with our Redux toolkit. So let's proceed to that. Okay, so from here, let's step over to our terminal. Okay, so make sure that you're still on the app folder. And from here, install this npm install Redux persist. Okay, so once installed, head over now to the store. Then from here, let's modify these settings. Okay, so the store here serves as the middleware for our data. So to apply the Redux persist, first we need to import our Redux persist. So I'm going to copy this one here. And then I'm going to paste that next to this one in this section. Okay, so that's the first one. Next, we're going to import also the persist library. Okay, now add it to this one. Okay, so now that we have the storage for the Redux persist and the Redux persist as well. So feel free to post this video and copy one by one. Now to apply this one, let's create a variable that will hold this value. So from here, let's create by typing this const persist config. Okay, so just copy along as what you have seen in this section. Okay, next, from here, let us import our reducer. I'm going to paste this code line. Okay, so this is where we combine our reducer. Copy this reducer, and then we're going to import that. Now for our movie reducer, let's get that from our pictures movie. Right? So this is where we get our reducer. Now to complete this one, let's add this combine reducer by adding these properties from Redux toolkit. Okay, okay, good. So that's all we need. Now, the next thing we need to do now is to combine this as these two features, the persist config and reducer. I'm going to assign that to persist reducer. Okay, so feel free to post this video and see how does it goes with this setup. All right, so that's all for our persist reducer. Now next, okay, by combining these things here, I want to replace this one now with the new store. There you go. Now feel free to pause this video and copy this code line by line. So this is where we set up our store. Okay. And lastly, to complete the operation, we're going to export this store to our project. Now to do that, by typing this export cons persistor, we're extracting or getting or calling the persistor store to our main project. All right. So that's all we need for our store. At this point here, our Redux setup is complete. We can now move to the front-end design. So let's proceed to that. All right. So for our front-end design, we're going to copy the same format from the last time's video. Now, the only difference is this time we're going to use or apply the Redux toolkit process. So let's move to that. So let's minimize everything. Okay. Now from our source folder, let's create a new folder. Same goes. We're going to need the following. So first, I'll be needing the pages. Then inside these pages, okay, take note, this should be inside the source folder. Now for our pages, let's create a new folder. And I'm going to name this as home. Inside home, let's create a new file. This time, I'm going to name this as index.typescript or TSX. Okay, good. So that's all we need for our pages. Now next, inside our source folder, let's create also another folder. And we're going to name this as components. Okay. So for our components, we're going to create a new file. Same goes as what we did last time. I'm going to name this as movie item.tsx. Okay, good. So these are the only thing we need for as of this time. So now, let's work now with the first one, which is the index.tsx. So same goes. I'm going to import the following. So first, I'm going to use the fc. Also, for this one, I'll be using the use effect. Okay, so these are all the properties of React. Right. So let's create the home. Right. So okay, done. Now that we have everything on set, so this time let's apply first from our features movies. So to apply that, okay, let's call the import and let's get all movies. This one. There you go. Okay, so that's all we need for our movies. Okay, so added to this one, we're going to import also the hooks. So what are the requirements for our hooks? So we have first, maybe I should set it in here. So the first one is I'll be using the use app dispatch. Yeah, that's the first one. And the next one is the use app selector. All right. So that's all we need for our hooks. So from here, let's begin the process. Okay, so inside here, I'll be assigning a dispatch. I'll be using this use app dispatch. All right, so that's the first one. Next, for extracts this the following. So first is the movies, and then the is success. By assigning this, I will using this app use selector. Okay. Now for our source, we're going to get that from our features. And let's call this select movie state and assign in here. All right. So that's what we need for our selector. Now, in here, I'm going to assign a variable. I'm going to name this as data. And I'm going to assign this to any value as an object. Okay. And then to activate this one, I'll be calling this use effect. Okay. For our use effect, I'll be calling a particular function. And I'm going to name this as fetch movies. But for now, we don't have this one. So we're going to create that. Right? So that's what we need. Okay. Now that we have our function fetch movies, this time, let's call or bring down our dispatch. And then by calling the function, this is the only time we're going to get the get all movies. Okay. So for now, as you can see, it asks for the argument. So since I don't have the values yet, I'm going to specify like this one. So this will return an empty request. All right. So that's all we need for our fetch movies. Okay, so basically that's all we need for that. So now let's work now with our display. So let's begin. Okay, so from here, let's begin with our table by calling this div. Now there are a few things from here. Uh, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the same format as what we did from our previous demo. So let me copy those. Okay. Now for those who haven't seen that tutorial, head back to this to the previous demo wherein I demonstrate using the hooks. But the only difference here is that I'm using now the Redux Toolkit. Okay, so that's all we need. So basically, we're just creating a table, a basic HTML table. So, okay, so I just label that. So we have the following. So we have first the caption, or rather the main table, and then we have this caption, movie list and with our head and with this following information. Now for the body, okay. So from for our body, we're going to pass the value from our data. Okay. So later on, we're going to set that data as we move along. Okay. So maybe we can do it now. Now the only thing, the only time that we can assign this value. Okay. So to call or assign the value for this data, we can simply say that this will only trigger if is success. From here, like if the return value is success, then we assign this data with this. All right. So that's all we need. Okay. So as you can see, this movies and its success was taken from the select movie state. So this is what we set up from our, if you review our, okay, so let's say, not here. I think it's in features selectors. There you go. So this is where we get those value. All right. So now we're calling this value and getting the value from the movies. Okay. So let's close this now. Okay. So whenever there's a changes in our Redux, this will automatically update. So next, okay, to understand this more, let's head now to our movie or movie item. So from here, let's import the following. And then let's call the function cons movie. Okay, so from here, let's call this FC. Okay, and then let's export that. Okay, that should be movie item. There you go. Okay, so that's all we need. Now to complete this process, let's apply a props. Now for this section, I only need these movies. Okay, so let's apply that to our parameter. And then these props should be next to FC. Okay, so that's all we need. And now, since we have that, I'm going to paste this movie section from the earlier demo. Okay, I'm going to remove everything from here first. Okay, so rather movies is this should be movie. Okay, just singular. There you go. All right. So that's all we need for our movie item. Okay. So feel free to post this video and copy this movie item component. All right. So once done, let's head over now to index.typescript or TSX. Then from here, we're going to import now the movie item. Okay, so there you go. Now that we have our movie item, I'm going to copy this one and in between this e-body, let's call that. Right. So from here, we're going to pass now the data. So for our data, I'll be using this result from our data. Now, let's continue this one. That map. Okay. And then this one should be next or in between this movie item. All right. So from here, we're going to assign a variable and we're going to name this as movie and I'm going to assign this to any. Okay. So what are the few things here needed? Now inside this movie item, the first one I'm going to assign is the key. So for our key, I'm going to use the ID and then we're going to pass the movie to a movie parameter, right? Right. So let's close this one. There you go. So let's check everything. Ah, okay. So I'm going to close one more here. Okay. So I'm going to indent this one so that you can see it clearly. And there you go. All right. So that's all we need for our, okay. So this index page. Next, we're going to import now our pages to our routes. So for this demo, we'll be using the React router DOM. Now to work on that, first we need to install that library by typing npm install React router DOM. Right? So once done, let's minimize this one. So within the source folder, let's create a new folder. So same goes, going to use this routes folder. Then inside our routes, we're going to create a new file. I'm going to name this as menu routes txx. All right. Now, but before we're going to apply the routes, let's apply this first to our index.typescript. So head over to our index.tsx in here. And then let's import browser router. Okay. And then let's copy that. And we're going to wrap that inside this app. Okay. So there you go. Okay. Now that we have this one, let's head over now to our menu routes. Then from here, let's import the following. First, we're going to need the FC, also the fragment. Okay. Also, we're going to import routes and route from the Rotterdam. Right. So that's the next one. And the third one, I'm going to import the home from pages home. Right. So that's all we need for our menu routes. And now let's begin creating the body by calling menu routes FC. Right. So from here, let's return. Okay. So first, we need the fragment. Inside the fragment, let's call the routes. Inside the routes, let's call the route. So what are the things needed for a route? We're going to need the path. So I'm going to set this as our default. And the element, going to call the home. There you go. And then let's close this component or route. And the last one, let's export this one by typing export default menu routes. Okay, so we have an highlight here. Did you mean import from pages home? Okay, so let's review that. Okay. So this should be without the curly braces. There you go. Okay. So feel free to post this video, and then so once done, let's head over now to our apt or app.tsx. So from here, let's import our routes. There you go. Okay, so that's all we need. Should we? Okay. So now let's copy these routes. Oh, so we have already here. Okay. So we can remove this one. Okay, so doesn't matter. So we can copy this route section, and then I'm going to replace everything from here to our routes. Okay, so that does not exist in our. Okay, so let's head over to our menu routes. Oh, yeah, it's menu routes. So okay, so it won't accept this menu routes on our. Okay, so let's try to rename this one. So instead of menu routes, I'm going to call this as routes. Okay, so that works. Okay, good. So that solved the problem. So now to test these routes, let's run both project. So first, let's run the API. Then from here, let's run the PHP artisan serve. Okay, so this one is running. Next, let's run now the app by typing npm start. There you go. All right, so good. So at this point here, our code is working. Okay, so to fully check, let's right click to our browser. Okay, so notice here, we have a bunch of error here. So even though we have a successfully displayed, but the logic here, this one keeps persistent. Now to fix this one, let's head over to our code. Okay, now head over to our index pages. Then from here, notice here this use effect. So let's fix this one by typing the following, clicking comma, and leave an object next to that. All right. So this poses the errors because it's looking for the object within the use effect. So let's check that now. Okay, okay, good. So it's this one is already stopped. So now let's reload our page. Okay, so but still continues. Okay, so let's reload our page to refresh everything. Okay, so sometimes this will take a while. I think much better. Oh, there. So there's the error now. I think because we're running everything forcingly, so we're forcing things to run at this point here. So what's the best way is to copy this one here and open in a new browser and then run. There you go. So close this one, the earlier example, because we have running now a new state here. Now if you check the code, there you go. All right. So that solves our problem. So that's it, guys. At this point here, we managed to run successfully our Redux toolkit. Now, with the help of the backend, which is the Laravel, this time we have now a pretty communication between the backend and the front end. And for our next step, let's continue this process and complete the create, update, and delete. So stay tuned.